Hello, and welcome back to Reality Threads. In today's video, we'll explore two cases of disappearance that were very close to being solved, but for incredibly disturbing reasons, they remained unsolved. Please stay with me and you will understand. We strongly advise viewers to exercise caution due to the distressing nature of the events we'll be discussing. In December 1958, in the freezing Columbia River Gorge, a cream and red Ford station wagon sped east from Portland, Oregon. Behind the wheel was 54-year-old Kenneth Martin, with his wife, Barbara, 48, and their three daughters, Barbie, 13, Virginia, and Susan, 11, all together in the car. The Martins had spent the evening at a Christmas party, and they told neighbors and family that they planned to spend the afternoon gathering fir and pine boughs for wreaths. It was an ordinary plan, part of the quiet routine of life in the Pacific Northwest. But by Monday morning, the Martin house was strangely empty. The dishes from the previous evening still sat in the kitchen, and a pile of laundry waited to be moved from the washing machine to the clothesline. What was more unusual, though, was the complete disappearance of the car containing all 5 family members. The days leading up to their disappearance had been completely normal. No signs of trouble, no enemies, no financial strain. Just a typical family preparing for Christmas. On Sunday, December 7th, 1958, at around 10 in the morning, the Martins left their driveway in their 1954 Ford Country Squire station wagon. They stopped for gas in Cascade Locks, about 40 miles from their home. Dean Baxter, the gas station proprietor, remembered the family well. He described Kenneth as polite but reserved. They filled up with 5 gallons of gas and continued east. Subsequently, another crucial aspect of the story came to light. Clara York, a waitress at the Paradise Snack Bar in Hood River, 20 miles past Cascade Locks, recalled serving the Martins a late lunch. She remembered them clearly, the family, the station wagon, and the girls. After the meal, she noted they planned to return to Portland, but they never arrived. The timeline remains unclear. Later reports from passing drivers said they saw the Martins on the north side of the Columbia River in Washington just before nightfall. If so, they would have had to detour across the Bridge of the Gods or another crossing, but there was no proof. Everything seemed completely typical. Kenneth paid the bill while the girls laughed, and Barbara sipped her coffee on a Sunday drive that could extend into the evening. It all seemed perfectly normal. The Martins might have lingered longer than expected in the gorge, or perhaps they had stopped to visit acquaintances. Regardless, it was assumed they would return soon. But by Monday, the Martins still hadn't come back. Kenneth, as was his custom, didn't report to work. Barbie didn't show up at Grant High, and Virginia and Susan were absent from Rose City School. The situation didn't take a darker turn until the evening of December 9th, when Kenneth's boss, Taylor Eccles, reported the family missing to the police. Officers arrived at the Martin home around 11 o'clock at night, knocked, waited, and then entered. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. No signs of a struggle, no broken windows or overturned furniture. The home appeared hurriedly deserted, as though the Martins had taken a brief excursion but never came back. No letters, no missing bags, and no indication that they intended to be away for more than a few hours were present. Their bank accounts were untouched, suggesting they had planned to return by dinner time. The police acted quickly after the missing persons report, but the investigation was chaotic. No single law enforcement agency took full responsibility for the case. Jurisdiction shifted between the Portland Police, Multnomah County, and Hood River County. At Cascade Locks, where the Martins had last stopped for gas, investigators found tire tracks near a gravel park by the river. But without central coordination, there was no clear command. Their family remained unaccounted for, leaving them with more questions than answers. The tracks seemed to show a vehicle that had reversed, possibly heading toward the embankment. The sheriff of Hood River County suggested the Martins may have accidentally driven off the bluff into the Columbia River below. The sheriff summoned divers to search the river, but their efforts yielded no results. The alarming possibility arose. What if the Martins hadn't simply driven off the road? There was a lack of consistency in the case. Detective Walter Graven, known for his meticulous and skeptical nature, was drawn to the case as the days passed and search efforts failed. He began to feel something was off. Subsequently, they made a significant discovery. They found a stolen 1951 white Chevrolet abandoned at Cascade Locks on the same day the Martins vanished. At first, people dismissed the car as an unrelated incident because it didn't match the Martin's Ford. However, the discovery was unavoidable. A .38 Colt, discarded in the bushes and covered in dried blood, lay inside the Chevrolet. The situation grew even stranger. Reports indicated that Meyer and Frank, a Portland department store, had stolen the gun. The connection? Donald, the son of Kenneth and Barbara Martin, had worked there 2 years earlier and had been accused of stealing $2,000 worth of sporting goods before disappearing from his parents' lives and enlisting in the Navy. Law enforcement allowed the man who found the gun to keep it, neglecting to conduct any fingerprint or blood type tests. Decades later, the man's widow came forward, claiming the gun had been battered and worn. By then, the trail had grown cold, and the evidence had been compromised. As suspicions about Donald grew, Detective Graven reached out to him for a phone interview. Donald, living in New York, spoke politely and cooperatively. He didn't seem to mourn the loss of his family, nor did he act defensive. The discovery of a gun resembling the one he had stolen years ago, found near the place his family had disappeared, didn't make him a suspect in the eyes of the authorities. On December 8th, Hood River County took into custody 2 men, Roy Light and another unidentified individual, for stealing the same abandoned Chevy. A waiter at the Paradise Snack Bar later testified that he had seen the 2 men in the diner with the Martin family. The 2 men, who had been seen with the Martin family at the Paradise Snack Bar, were questioned but ultimately cleared of any involvement in the disappearance. Authorities thought they might have followed the Martins, but after a thorough investigation, they were found to have no connection to the family's mysterious vanishing. As 1959 began, the case shifted from a tragic disappearance to a full-blown mystery, with each new clue offering more questions than answers. On May 1st, 1959, nearly 5 months after the Martins disappeared, something unusual happened beneath the Columbia River's surface. A drilling rig operating near the Dalles, Oregon, hooked something heavy on its anchor. The object fought back before slipping free, evoking theories and speculation that outpaced the facts. At dawn on May 2nd, a fisherman and his wife spotted 2 objects floating near Cascade Locks. They rushed to investigate, but the objects sank, carried away by the river, just out of reach. By the afternoon of May 3rd, a body had washed ashore on the north bank of the river near Camas, Washington, about 70 miles west of the Dalles. Dental records identified the body as Susan, the youngest of the Martin daughters. The next day, another body was discovered near Bonneville Dam. Dental records also identified it as Susan. The news shook Portland to its core. 2 of the Martin girls were confirmed dead, but the fate of the remaining family members remained unclear. An autopsy determined that the girls had drowned, but a technician claimed to have seen bullet wounds in their skulls. The medical examiner suggested that decomposition caused the damage, but the technician's claim raised doubts. What truly perplexed investigators were metal fragments found on Susan's clothes, including aluminum. At first, it seemed insignificant, but when one considered the location of the bodies, the riverbed where the drilling rig had snagged its anchor, it became far more intriguing. Directly across from the riverbed was an aluminum smelting plant. Had the drilling rig disturbed the riverbed and freed the bodies from the Martins' car? Why didn't the first search find the car, if it had been there all along? Subsequent sonar scans, helicopter surveys, and dive teams failed to yield any more results, leading authorities to cancel further efforts. Despite a diver nearly drowning during one of the searches, only 2 bodies had surfaced, while the station wagon and 3 family members remained missing. Detective Walter Graven, who had tirelessly pursued the case, was ordered to shift focus to cases with clearer answers. However, the disappearance of the Martin family haunted him, and he steadfastly held onto the theory of their murder. He believed that the key to unlocking the mystery lay within the car. Walter passed away in 1988, his obsession with the case unfulfilled. For 65 years, the mystery of the Martin family's disappearance remained submerged in the cold, murky waters of the Columbia River. But in late 2024, diver Archer Mayo, neither a detective nor a journalist, decided to continue the search. Equipped with the latest technology and driven by an insatiable curiosity, Mayo focused his efforts near Cascade Locks, the site where the tire tracks had been found back in 1958. For months, he meticulously mapped the riverbed, exploring every crevice and dip. Then, one day, he discovered an underwater pit about 20 feet. 6 meters, deep. His instincts told him that the pit was where the car lay. Unable to investigate thoroughly that day, he returned the next morning to examine it further. At sunrise, Mayo descended once again into the depths, and this time he found it. The wreckage of a car, about 15 meters below the surface, buried beneath layers of rock and silt that had accumulated over decades. Official recovery operations began on March 6, 2025. The next day, workers removed the vehicle's chassis, engine, and rear axle. These parts were enough to confirm the vehicle's make and model, a Ford. The paint matched the red and cream color scheme of the Martin family's car. But, despite their best efforts, divers couldn't recover the complete VIN due to the debris. The car was wrapped and transported to a warehouse for forensic analysis. Investigators were 99% certain that it was the Martin family's vehicle, though the full VIN remained elusive. Most crucially, no human remains were found inside the vehicle, and so the mystery remains unsolved. How did the Martin family's Ford end up in the Columbia River? Was it a tragic accident? Or was something far more sinister at play? For now, that question lingers unanswered, but one thing is certain: the case is far from over. It was a dull October afternoon at the Chelmsford Car Wash in Massachusetts, one of those ordinary days when time seemed to linger. The car wash blended into its surroundings, which were surrounded by gas stations and strip malls. However, everything changed on that October day in 1998. Seeking a little distraction, a young worker tossed a ball against the side of the building, catching it each time it bounced back. But a particularly powerful throw sent the ball off course, sending it into a nearby vacant lot. There, it landed in a neglected patch of dirt and weeds. Curious, the worker went to retrieve it, but as he approached, something unsettling caught his eye. Buried beneath the dirt was something that didn't belong. Its whiteness and cleanliness were unmistakable. He knelt down and realized it was a jawbone. It was a human jawbone. Within hours, police arrived at the scene, and in the days that followed, they dug through the dirt, uncovering more bones. A fragile silver herringbone necklace, coiled around what remained of a neck, suggested that the skeleton belonged to a woman, her flesh long gone. But there was a chilling twist. The remains didn't match any missing person reports. No one came forward, and no relatives were found. The woman seemed to have disappeared completely. The remains lay dormant for years. The disturbing sign of foul play was the deliberate nature of the shallow grave, just 10 inches deep. Yet despite all this, the question remained, who was she? And why had nobody reported her missing? Nancy Anne Lackey became a ghost of her life even before her bones were unearthed. She had endured severe neglect as a child, moving from one place to another, abandoned time and time again. Her mother, Leona, was an alcoholic with a violent temper, prone to outbursts of rage that left their mark on her children. Leona, born into a violent household, passed that legacy on to her children. By the time Nancy Anne turned 4, the damage had already occurred. Whether deliberate or not, someone brutally twisted Nancy Anne's leg until it snapped one dark night. Authorities stepped in, taking 3 of Leona's 4 children from her care. Paul, the youngest, was left behind and went to live with their aunt and uncle, while Nancy Anne and 2 siblings were placed into foster care. At that point, the fear of adults had set in. Nancy Anne saw them as monsters. She withdrew into herself, retreating to a childlike state. The sound of footsteps in the hallway would send her into a panic, and she would suck her thumb until it bled. She also continued to wet the bed long after she should have outgrown this behavior. Nancy Anne finally found her break in 1979 when she was 8.5 years old. The Lant family took her in as their own and eventually settled in Fort Washington, Maryland. For a time, Nancy Anne seemed to thrive, developing into an introverted artist who loved to write, draw, and play music. But the scars of her past would never fully heal. Despite her newfound security, Nancy Anne still felt like a scared little girl, prone to violent mood swings at the slightest provocation. When she committed a mistake, such as spilling a drink or being late, her anxiety would escalate. Still, Nancy Anne never stopped thinking about the family she had been torn from. Her biological siblings, who had been scattered across the foster system. She kept in touch with them through letters and phone calls, constantly thinking of them. She went through the typical stages of adolescence and young adulthood, But the weight of her past was always there, heavy on her shoulders. By 1989, Nancy Anne's inner peace shattered. Perhaps it was the cumulative toll of suppressing her pain for so long. Despite her adoptive family's efforts to create a stable home, she began to push back. But Nancy Anne wasn't just acting out. She was preparing to leave. It was a journey that no one anticipated. At 17, Nancy Anne should have been planning her prom, dreaming about her future, and looking ahead to life beyond high school. But for her, that wasn't the case. The pull of her past was too strong, and the quest for answers became everything. She finally made her decision during the summer of 1989. Leaving behind the only security she had ever known, Nancy Anne abruptly quit high school, packed her belongings, and left without saying a word to the Launts. In June 1989, the Launts had their final encounter with Nancy Anne. She slipped away, heading to Massachusetts to reunite with her mother, whom she hadn't seen in over a decade. In Leona's case, not much had changed over the years. Leona remained the same, just a bit older and meaner than the hard-edged woman Nancy Anne had escaped from. But Nancy Anne managed to track her down. Nancy Anne found Leona in the fall of 1989, living in a rundown 6-unit apartment complex on Wilson Road in North Billerica. The area was surrounded by industrial decay, and the complex was conveniently located near a train station. It wasn't exactly a home. It was more of a place to exist, with sagging floors, peeling paint, and nosy neighbors. Nancy Anne defied all expectations by moving in, but there was no comforting embrace, no emotional reunion. There was just a bond of blood and a shared history between these two women. Nancy Anne tried to establish herself in the area, but old patterns soon resurfaced. The terror returned. The tears came easily. Neighbors watched as events unfolded. One neighbor described the apartment as frigid, harsh, and suffocating, and the Lackeys were anything but very nice. Instead of finding healing, Nancy Anne's search for her mother reignited the wounds she had spent years trying to mend. By December 1989, Nancy Anne was in danger of succumbing to her own agony. By the time the new year arrived, she was gone. However, her disappearance went beyond a mere act of vanishing. The girl who had spent her whole life searching for her family became another ghost, someone no one bothered to look for, somewhere between the dreary months of December 1989 and January 1990. Nancy Anne left behind no specific date, no last known location, and no phone number. No documentation. She simply vanished from that stuffy apartment on Wilson Road. Unsurprisingly, Leona remained unfazed. There was no report filed, and she never contacted the police. When questioned later, she casually mentioned Nancy Anne's departure, assuming her daughter had returned to her adoptive family in Maryland, resigned and despondent. Despite the Launts continuing their search from hundreds of miles away, no interstate search was launched, and no FBI task force was created to find her. Everyone assumed she had run away, just another runaway who had made her choice. Nearly a decade passed with Nancy Anne's lifeless body concealed just a few yards from the rear wall of the car wash. A broader search began after her bones were discovered by that wayward ball. A girl, missing for 5 to 20 years, with a height of about 5 feet 5 inches, became the subject of a worldwide appeal from investigators. Initially, the search appeared to be futile, but then a genuine tip came in from Prince George's County, Maryland, about a missing girl named Nancy Anne, who had connections to Massachusetts and had been reported missing in 1989. Dental records and DNA testing confirmed it. The bones belonged to Nancy Anne. The Maryland runaway had been buried near her family. That's when the detectives understood the full gravity of the situation. Richard Lackey, Nancy Anne's real uncle, was the boss of the Chelmsford car wash. Paul, Nancy Anne's brother, also worked at the car wash, and this unsettling fact, along with his assumption that she had simply disappeared without filing a missing persons report, deepened the unease. It was becoming increasingly clear to investigators that this wasn't a random murder, and Nancy Anne wasn't just another runaway who happened to cross paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. Her final resting place wasn't miles away from her family. It was almost in their backyard. Amid all the confusion, there was a family member who knew exactly what had happened to Nancy Anne, but they refused to speak about it. The police kept the Lackeys under surveillance for months after identifying Nancy Anne's bones. Despite the tight connections and the proximity to her family, no one broke their silence. In March 1999, the police discovered Richard, Nancy Ann's uncle, dead in the bathroom of his Hopkinsville, Kentucky apartment. Along with his body, they found a suicide note. The note contained just 3 words. "You were right. I did it." There was no context, no explanation, just those cryptic words. The note hinted that alcohol might have played a role, as it had in many dark chapters of the Lackey family's history. But beyond that, there was nothing. Whatever secrets Richard held, they died with him. Richard never explained his actions, but the note confirmed them. One piece of his history did offer some insight into his behavior. Richard had been imprisoned in 1968 for the murder of his fiancée. The crime had started with an argument on the way to his brother's wedding. Richard became enraged, grabbed her by the neck, and caused her to lose her balance, falling to the ground and dying instantly from a head injury after hitting a concrete slab. Afterward, he buried her body in the woods, digging a shallow grave about 10 inches deep and covering it with debris. Richard was sentenced to 8 years for second-degree manslaughter and emerged from prison unchanged. There would be no trial, no courtroom drama, and, sadly, no justice for Nancy Anne. Just an ending. The Massachusetts authorities closed the book on Nancy Anne's case when the dust settled. Richard had died, and his handwritten confession had sealed the door on further investigation. Leona and the rest of the family were never charged with anything related to Nancy Anne's death. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, I truly appreciate it. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.